Well, hello and welcome back to NorthStarOasis. I'm your host, Jeff Williams. Please feel free to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our handle is simply NorthStarOasis, so if you put the @ symbol in or you do the like button, you can do whatever it is that you need to do to make sure you're following us and keeping up to date with the discussion and watching our archives. Now, last week we brought on State Senator Roger Chamberlain to discuss the end of the 2015 legislative session and the special session, and we had a lot of people stopping by the control booth to visit our producer during this point in time, and then we also had our intern, Andrew. He was just really impressed with the fact that we had a state senator live in studio. And he, it's like, for these guys, it's like, wow, a state senator is like the next thing to President Obama. I mean, they're that high up on the pecking order. Well, not quite, but for somebody who hasn't been around politics that often, it might seem that way sometimes. But we are indebted to Senator Chamberlain for stopping by last week, and we really had a great discussion, which again you can catch on YouTube. But today we are going to have a very jam-packed episode, so I'm going to go right into 81 weeks and 5 days from now, January 20th, 2017. We will be inaugurating a new president. President Obama's replacement will be named. Who will it be? As we've been doing in the past number of weeks, we have run our intro segment to highlight a presidential candidate who's jumped into the race from one of the two major parties, who might have the best chance at getting the nomination. And for this week's presidential flavor of the week, we go to New York City with former New York Governor George Pataki. Actually, he didn't make the declaration speech in New York City. He went up to Exeter, New Hampshire, which in the video is stated as the birthplace of the Republican Party. Well, I actually had to look that up because I've always known Ripon, Wisconsin to be the birthplace of the Republican Party. Well, is the birthplace of Exeter, New Hampshire, is the birthplace of the idea of creating the Republican Party. Ripon, Wisconsin, indeed, was actually where the document signed and the first real meeting of a national party had occurred that became the Republican Party. But anyway, let's go to the video and see what Governor Pataki has to say.
We're here in Exeter, New Hampshire, birthplace of the Republican Party, Abraham Lincoln's party, who saved the Union and who brought the promise of freedom to all Americans. Teddy Roosevelt's party, who fought for the square deal so that the rich and powerful couldn't limit the freedom of working Americans. And Ronald Reagan's party, who restored Americans' belief in ourselves and in the transcendent value of freedom. The freedom that has given us the greatest country the world has ever known. The freedom that a man named Amos Tuck declared the foundation of that party right here in Exeter, New Hampshire. The same freedom that I fear is at risk today from an ever more powerful, more intrusive government in Washington. It is to preserve and protect that freedom for us that I stand here today. It is to preserve and protect. It is to preserve and protect that freedom for future generations that I speak. It is to preserve and protect that freedom that this morning I announce I am a candidate for the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Thank you.
Well, I no way at this point in time endorse any single person who's running for president, Republican or Democrat. I will give some props to former Governor Pataki, that of all of the candidates that we have seen and discussed so far, Republican or Democrat, what I like and appreciate about George Pataki is the fact that he actually has a positive vision that he's articulating. And really, if you want to see some positivity, I got to show you his ad. He's got one of the first ads that I've seen in the 2016 election cycle. I keep looking for him every single week, and this one I was impressed with because he is so positive.
America has a big decision to make about who we're going to be, what we're going to stand for. The system is broken. The question is no longer about what our government should do, but what we should do about our government, about our divided union, about our uncertain future. We are founded on a miracle, a heroic past built on courage, on inventors, visionaries, and heroes, a God-given belief in the nobility of the human spirit, and the fact that liberty is the only way for that spirit to thrive. Washington has grown too big, too powerful, too expensive, and too intrusive. This is exactly what the Founding Fathers feared. They knew all governments had the tendency to grow endlessly and ultimately to take power from the people and give it to themselves, the politicians. It is time to stand up, protect our freedom, and take back this government. I was a Republican governor in a very deep blue state, the state of New York, and I was governor for 3 terms. And it's because at the end people realized my vision was not a partisan division, it was a vision about people, about what we could accomplish together. When I got elected mayor, the last thing in the world I thought about is someday I could be governor of New York State. I was this unknown person from Peekskill, not exactly Manhattan or New York City. If you care about people, you don't have to be governor, you don't have to be president, you don't have to be a U.S. senator to try to impact their lives. We can pass all the laws in the world, have all the rules and regulations, but unless we have men and women like you prepared to risk your lives to defend this country, they don't mean anything. God bless you all, and lunch is on me. We have always understood that we have a common background and a common destiny. And when we stand together, we can accomplish anything. I saw that on the streets of New York in the days and weeks after September 11th. We understood we were all Americans who had been attacked and were going to rise up together, and we did. We need to recapture that spirit, that sense that we are one people. When we do, we will stop empowering politicians and empower ourselves with the opportunities to have an unlimited, bright future. We the people, not Washington, are equipped to lead this nation. We the people can make a difference. We the people are what make this nation great.
When we stand together, Americans can accomplish anything.
We are all in this together, and let us all understand that what unites us is so much more important than what might seem superficially to divide us. If we are to flourish as a people, we have to fall in love with America again.
I've been up on that tower. That's exactly what we hoped, that we would not just rebuild what was here, but build higher and taller and soar to new heights and show people we weren't going to think small or live afraid. And it really does what we wanted it to do, which is to reclaim the skyline and stand out as a symbol of coming back not just as strong, but stronger and better.
That I was extremely impressed with Governor Pataki's ad. That is really, really positive. It sets a really good tone, and I wish him all the best in this race. It's going to be extremely difficult, I think, for any candidate to get any type of traction. I do know on the Democrat side that Bernie Sanders has been cutting into Hillary Clinton's lead in the polls. So, anything's possible this early out, but to set a positive tone like that, I just have to say I am very, very impressed. And I hope you are too. And I keep all of these candidates with an open mind. I look at all of them for the strengths, their weaknesses, their record, the rhetoric, and try to balance all of that in. And that's why, honestly, I have not made a decision. And part of this is the reason we do this exercise is also educational for me, because I really do not know who would make a good. I think there's a lot of qualified people who are in this race who would make a fine president, and it's going to be actually, I think, a fun race to watch, because I don't think we're going to see quite as much negativity. I hope I'm right, that I don't think the people anymore want to see as much negativity as we've had in the past. And that's why I think, and I even criticized 2 weeks ago, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. He was way too negative in the way he started off his campaign. And we still have many other good people who are in the race. We have many more to go who are still going to be entering the race yet. And we're still about 2 months behind. Believe it or not, we get 2 more months of this, possibly 3, of every single week highlighting another presidential candidate of the week. So we got a lot of great people. It's going to be a very interesting race. Something I forgot to mention a couple of weeks ago when we were discussing the upcoming presidential contest is that the Iowa straw poll, which the Republican Party of the state of Iowa have had a tradition of doing for many, many years, a couple of decades, they actually canceled that this year in light of other competition, mainly a major event going on in Atlanta, Georgia, that has been sponsored down there. So 5 of the main front runners have backed out of the Iowa straw poll, and that means there's just no need. The Iowa GOP said we don't need to have it this year as much as we've done it in the past, and therefore they're letting it go. It's not going to happen. It was originally scheduled, I believe that was for August 8th. We were hoping to be able to send our video crew down there to get some one-on-ones with some presidential candidates, but that unfortunately at this point is not going to happen. Anyhow, since we still have a very full show, we are going to move on to the next topic, and that is the 100 or 101st anniversary of World War I. And as we're starting to look at the 4th of July, and as you know, I'm a military historian, what can I say? I feel that it's time that we give a lot of due to World War I. A few weeks ago, we mentioned a segment, I had a segment on the Battle of Belleau Wood. Back in December, we had a section on the Christmas truce, but there's so much more to go. But one of the things, and this is why we chose today to do this, is the 101st anniversary of the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand occurs tomorrow. So it's June 28th, 1914. That was when this happened. And so we're going to bring it off with Dan Snow, who was in Sarajevo, who put together a video clip that explains what happened with the Archduke's assassination.
On June the 28th, 1914, a murder took place here in Sarajevo, Bosnia, that ignited a world war. This is how it happened. The heir to the mighty Austrian Empire, Franz Ferdinand, is visiting Sarajevo, the capital of one of his empire's most restless provinces. Many Bosnians wish to be part of next-door Serbia. Days earlier, the Archduke says, "I wouldn't be surprised if there are a few Serbian bullets waiting for me." He arrives with his wife Sophie on the morning of June the 28th, 1914. It's their wedding anniversary. They've loved their trip so far. It's also an anniversary for the Serbs. Vidovdan, the date of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo against the Ottoman Turks, where the Serbians were heroically crushed. It has always been a day on which the Serbs renewed their ambition to throw off the yoke of a foreign overlord. The couple arrive here at the train station where they conduct a troop inspection. At 10 o'clock they set off in a convoy of vehicles. Theirs is a luxury open limousine. They drive south, then east. Their destination is here, the town hall where a lavish reception is waiting. Little did the royal couple know, but they were about to run a lethal gauntlet. Along the route are assassins, young men committed to freeing Bosnia from Austrian rule and uniting with Serbia. They are armed with weapons supplied by rogue members of the Serbian government. The first assassin is standing here, armed with a pistol, but as the convoy drives past, he freezes and does nothing. At 10:10, the convoy reaches Nadielko Kobrinovic. At that bridge there, Kobrinovic was waiting, a young man dying of tuberculosis, desperate to complete this mission before his death. He threw a bomb as the Archduke's car passed at 20 yards range. It bounced off the back of the car and rolled underneath the car behind, blowing up and injuring around 20 people. The Archduke's driver accelerated away down here past the necks of the assassins. This assassin, Gavrilo Princip, does nothing, perhaps assuming that the bomb has done its job. Franz Ferdinand is shaken, but attends the reception at the town hall. The speech he reads out is covered in the blood of his assistant, injured in the crash. They decide to visit their wounded colleagues and the bystanders in the Sarajevo hospital. At 10:45, the royal group leave the town hall. They drive along the same road on which they've survived one assassination attempt already today. Meanwhile, Princip, having failed in his assassination attempt, is standing around on this street corner. Nobody has informed the Archduke's driver about the change of plan, so at the very same junction, the driver slows down and turns right. The Archduke's car rolled in, turned right, and stopped right here, as the driver was told they actually wanted to go that way. The driver stalled the car. Princip took his pistol out of his pocket and fired 2 shots at 1.5 meters range. First hit Sophie in the abdomen. The second shot grazed the jugular of the Archduke. They were mortally wounded. They were the first 2 shots fired in what would become the First World War, a war that would see well over 10 million people killed, fired on this street corner in Sarajevo.
And that was just the very, very beginning. But now, I suppose, if you haven't studied your history, what has an Archduke's assassination in Sarajevo have to do anything with creating a big war? Well, it was just the domino effect of a larger, they were just players in a much larger game. Let's take a look at the next video, which explains it a little bit more.
The war to end all wars, the First World War, can arguably be traced back to one moment that set off a series of deadly consequences. Hi, I'm Rebecca Brayton and welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we'll be exploring how World War I began. The event that sparked the First World War was the murder of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were shot and killed in the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo. The man who fired the shots was Gavrilo Princip. This assassin and his accomplices were members of a larger movement that wished to break free from Austria-Hungary and create an independent Yugoslavia. Starting something far bigger than anyone could have anticipated, Ferdinand's assassination initiated a chain of events leading to one of the largest and deadliest conflicts in world history. Shortly after the Archduke's assassination, Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia. This attempt to exert control over the Balkans was also an effort to crush the nationalist movement responsible for the death. Unsatisfied with the response, Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia on July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination. While the trigger for the war is considered by many to be the Archduke's assassination, there were several other long-term causes at play in Europe in the years leading to it. Some historians have identified imperialism as a primary cause of World War I. Throughout the 19th century, tensions between European powers surfaced. New control of foreign resources, markets, and people by France, the United Kingdom, and other countries were the root of this tension. Meanwhile, natural resources throughout Europe were dwindling. This caused some countries to seek new territory. The decades before the war saw rivalries and alliances established. By 1914, a tangled mess of treaties identified what would ultimately become the two sides of World War I. After war was declared on Serbia, this web of alliances quickly came into play. Most of Europe, as well as world powers from abroad, were drawn into the war. The 4-year war would result in a complete reorganization of Europe's political landscape and the death of approximately 16 million people.
So in the ensuing next 6 months, when we had the alignment of the different countries involved in the beginning of the war, and the three major powers that were really at war at that time, because Austria-Hungary and all of that, they were more satellites. It was really the big dominant player being Germany, France, and Britain. France and Germany already had a lot of things going on between surrenders and a certain rail car in Alsace-Lorraine. Portions of, Alsace and Lorraine provinces of France would sometimes they'd be with Germany, sometimes they'd be with France, sometimes they'd be with Germany. There was some bad blood between the French and the Germans. And so those two were in conflict. Then you also had the British interests. And so you had the British and the French. They were going against Germany. And then you also had the Russians, kind of like we would see later on in World War II. The Russians were also involved against Germany in World War II. But now let's take a look at one miraculous thing that happened about 6 months later. And then since we are 180 days away from Christmas, it's time to talk about the Christmas truce of 1914. This is an old video.
It was a beautiful, bright winter's day, cold, but very sunny and bright and quite a pleasant day. The only thing which all marred it was during breakfast time, a chap in the next bay to us was a very popular young singer in the company. He was shot through the head by a sniper.
Later, they photographed his grave with its telltale date, 24/12/14. And now the night of Christmas Eve was drawing on. And for many soldiers in the trenches, this was to become the most memorable Christmas of their lives.
It was a Christmas card, Christmas Eve. There was a white, beautiful moonlight, frost on the ground, almost white everywhere. And round about, I think about 7 or 8 in the evening, we heard this singing, a lot of commotion, and we saw some lights. I don't know what they were, some lights. And later, we heard them singing, Still a Silent Night. Still a Night, Silent Night. I shall never forget it. It's one of the highlights of my life, absolutely, to see them. I thought, what a beautiful tune.
Rifleman Williams, at that time, was on watch 10 miles to the north, in a frontline trench on the edge of Plug Street Wood.
I was standing there on duty and gazing across, looking across towards the German parapet, and nothing much going on, but I thought, well, a very different Christmas this is going to be from any I've spent up till now. I thought about this time at home we should have finished putting up all the greenery and holly and stuff, and my father would have been just finished making his rum punch, which he always did at Christmas. Anyway, I thought, my word, I could just do with a swig of that rum punch now, and feeling pretty miserable altogether. Then all of a sudden, lights appeared all along the German trench. And I thought, well, that's a funny thing. Then the Germans started singing, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. And I woke up, with all the other sentries did the same thing. We all woke up the other people to come along and see this. What on earth's going on? They finished their carol, we applauded them, and then we thought we must retaliate in some way. So we replied with the First Noel, and when we'd finished that, they all began clapping, and then they struck up another favourite carol of theirs, O Tannenbaum, which is the same tune as the Red Flag. And so we went on, first the Germans singing one of their carols, then we'd sing another of ours, until then we started up Come All Ye Faithful, and the Germans immediately joined in, singing the same thing to the Latin words of Adeste Fideles. And well, I thought this was rather an extraordinary thing, really, to think of the two nations both singing the same carol in the middle of a war.
They sang something and we applauded, and then we sang something back. And they applauded. I think they were perhaps a bit better at it than we were. They're very fond of male voice choirs, aren't they, the Germans? And they would sing things like Stille Nacht and all that, and sing them really rather beautifully.
Christmas morning, 1914. Behind the front, a formal church parade. At the front, the atmosphere of the night before still prevailed.
It was rather foggy, actually, at first, that morning, but when the fog cleared, we began to climb out the trench and wave and then quickly jump in again in case they shot at us. But nobody did shoot, and eventually several people got out, and some of us went forward beyond our barbed wire. Anyway, eventually a couple of chaps met in no man's land and shook hands and turned round and waved, and we all cheered, and then we flocked out like a football crowd, sort of, running as fast as we could. It was very broken ground, and people fell into shell holes and things, but still we all got into the middle eventually, and we began to shake hands, and then we began to swap things like cigarettes and cigars and chocolate and cognac, and we gave them a bit of rum and so on, and everything got very friendly and happy. And we stayed out there the whole of the day.
Meanwhile, similar unwarlike scenes were being repeated over 2/3 of the British 30-mile front, as battalion after battalion joined in the most remarkable act of fraternization in modern war.
The no man's land was an extraordinary sight. It was full of parties of Germans and British all meeting each other and talking and laughing and exchanging souvenirs, exchanging buttons and cap badges and so forth. Well, I was walking along and a chap came up to me and he actually greeted me with the words, "What's your cock, how's London?" Well, I said, "Good Lord, you speak English?" "Well," he said, "well, I am English." "No," I said, "you speak like a Londoner." He said, "Well, I'm a Londoner." I said, "Well, what the hell are you doing in the German army?" He said, "Well, I'm a German Londoner." And apparently I think he'd been born in Germany, but he'd gone to England immediately afterwards with his parents, and they had a small business in the East End of London somewhere. And he'd been brought up in England and gone to school in England and everything.
It was all quiet, no firing, and no guns, artillery, and we had rumours passed along the line that there was a meeting with the Germans and British, but we didn't think any more of it until later. We saw the Germans coming out their trenches near us, almost opposite, and we, all curious, did the same thing. We came out of our trenches and we walked towards these Germans, and of course not many of them spoke English. We did find one, a young waiter. He told us he'd worked at De Kaiser's Royal Hotel, Blackfriars in London. He had a wife and 2 children, and he said he didn't want the war at all. And I think,
Well, that was a BBC documentary on the Christmas truce. We played a lot of this already back in our December program, but I wanted to give you a feel for what happened. Keep in mind, that was only 6 months into the war, really. That was the first Christmas. Unfortunately, that Christmas truce would not be in perpetuity. It would be very, very brief, as the commanders, mainly the British commanders, but I think some of the Germans also said, "Hey, what are you guys doing? That's your enemy. Let's get back in. Let's fight another battle." And unfortunately, that just means that the war would be prolonged, and both the French and the British, who did not have the superior trenches like the Germans did, still really ended up having the next couple of years of trench warfare. But what was happening in the United States at that time, there was a huge debate going on here as to what should President Woodrow Wilson do. Wilson said, "I'm going to stay out of the war." But what was happening is we had interests where we were funneling supplies to both sides, the Germans, the British, and the French. And they were the recipients of a lot of the trade. And this really helped put America on the map economically, is that a lot of people, especially here in the Midwest, towns like New Ulm, German built, and they wanted us to support Germany. But ultimately, it came down to our siding with the Allies. And we're going to take a quick look at a video about what U.S. troops entering World War II. Eventually. Our producer's having technical difficulty.
By the end of 1916, The Allies, led by the French and British, had been fighting the Germans on the Western Front for more than 2 years, with heavy losses on all sides.
By the end of 1916, the Germans reached a remarkable conclusion: that their great German army, the basis of their military strength for many years, could not defeat the Western Allies, the British and the French. There was no victory for them on the Western Front. That the only way they were going to be able to defeat the British and French was by sea, by starving the British Isles into submission through unrestricted submarine warfare. And they knew almost certainly the United States would come into the war against them.
April 6, 1917, and the United States took up arms to join the Allies. Recruits came, bankers, bakers, men from every walk of life. Goodbye Broadway, and over there were the songs as they sailed. The Yanks are coming as the camel...
By early 1918, there is only a few thousand American troops in France. By May 1918, there will be 500,000. By July 1918, there will be 1 million. Everybody can see this coming. But this is the German gamble. If they can attack on the Western Front in spring 1918 and defeat the British and the French before the Americans arrive in force, then they will have won the war.
Over 2 years, up to the end of the Great War, more than 2 million men were inducted into the US Army. The first fighting unit to be sent to France in 1917 was the 1st US Infantry Division, later known as the Big Red One. It quickly established a reputation for hard fighting and has become one of the most effective military units of the past 100 years. The Big Red One set out to prove itself superior to all other troops.
The training schedule was terrific. Long marches, drilling and bayonet work, both French and English style, learning to throw hand grenades, and learning to shoot the French automatic rifle that usually jammed when you needed it most. Because most Americans had played baseball, they took to throwing grenades like a duck to water and became the most proficient in the use of hand grenades of all the Allied troops. This training continued until the troops were expert in the art of French and English warfare, in addition to the extensive training they had received in American warfare on the Mexican border.
And there was the beginning of America's involvement. We had sided with the Allies against Germany. It began the training. A lot of the training occurred in Europe. And what happened with the first shots? How did we get there? Well, first of all, the American Expeditionary Force was under General John Blackjack Pershing, and Pershing believed that the British and French were wrong for sticking to trench warfare for so long, and that's what helped them get afraid to fight. That's what kind of gave them what we would consider the weak spines. But when you're really sitting there in a trench warfare situation for so long, and you know, it really gets to you, and that's what was happening there. But Pershing knew with fresh troops and hoping that the Germans were just as battle-weary as the British and French that he had seen, felt that getting the other troops out in the open would give a better opportunity for success and, of course, ending the war. And that's kind of what happened. So here is the first attack by U.S. troops.
Two gunners, while on gun guard, were discussing a church steeple, the only remaining structure in the enemy lines. One soldier said to the other, "I will bet you 100 francs that I can hit that church steeple." The bet was called. Boom! The cannon roared with a direct hit on the church steeple. The structure disintegrated in a cloud of dust and stones. The Germans took a very dim view of the Americans' action in shooting down their best observation post. The the German artillery opened up with an artillery barrage that put an end to the quiet sector. This shell was the first shell fired at the enemy by the American Expeditionary Forces. But this was only the beginning, for millions more were to follow, fired by those experts who fired their guns so fast that they were loaded on the recoil before the gun settled after being fired. From that day, American blood began staining the soil of France.
Yeah. What also was happening at the same time was you had the United States Marine Corps. They totaled 13,633 officers and men on April 6, 1917, when the United States entered World War I. There were 2,236 who were on sea duty, with the rest who were serving in China, Guam, Haiti, the Hawaiian Islands, Nicaragua, Philippine Islands, Santo Domingo, the Virgin Islands, and 6,644 of them were based here in the United States. During the war, one Marine brigade was based in Texas, just in case there were troubles in Mexico that had endangered Allied oil supplies, and another brigade was scattered throughout Cuba. Keep in mind, it wasn't too long before that, where we were at war in Cuba, the Spanish-American War in 1898. And then other Marine units were stationed in the Azores, which were Portuguese islands, which I've actually been to the Azores. Portuguese islands in the Eastern Atlantic basin. Active operations were carried out in Haiti and Santo Domingo against bandits, Pancho Villa, but by November 11th, 1918, 4 Marines had been killed and 14 wounded in Santo Domingo. But what had happened in June of 1918 was the Battle of Belleau Wood, which we'd featured a couple of weeks ago on the show, but we're going to show you the video that is played at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia, about Belleau Wood, just to give you a flavor of what it might have been like.
Lieutenant! Fix bayonets! Fix bayonets! Rock and roll! Low! Cloudy! Mitiano! Take that gun! Flank right! Close you can! On my mark! Flank left! On me! Cover me! Dramatic! On boys! Let's get him out! Go!
was a representative of what Bellow would have looked like. Obviously, that's just a very, very small sampling because you got to add thousands of people on both sides. It was really bloody. It was really gory. It was really, really bad. And the whole thing about World War I is it does show the human side of one-upsmanship between the British, the French, the Germans, even the Americans. There was still a lot of egos involved at the higher ups. But when you look at the average common foot soldier, it's a different story. And that includes Marines. The 2nd Division of the Allied Expeditionary Force was now established on the Marne salient nearest Paris, excluding Hill 142. And I am reading from naval history. Bois de Belleau, Bellewood, Bourges, and Vaux. Also, the Germans held Chateau Thierry on the right of the 2nd Division and continued to do so until about July 17, 1918. Now, when I say 2nd Division, the 4th Marine Brigade was attached to the 2nd U.S. Army Division as a compromise to get Marines into the fight, even though John Blackjack Pershing wanted only Army troops over there. He did not want Marines. And I'll tell you this, and one thing about Bellewood is that that was an error that Pershing made. He had already put in some stringent public affairs rules. He did not want anybody knowing what Army units were over there. He did not want it broadcast where they were, where the Army was doing. He didn't want to have anything to leak out about what the Army was doing out there at all. But he did not put that same prohibition on the United States Marine Corps. And as a result, you have the Marines who took advantage of whatever publicity they could get. And of course, the war correspondents over there, they flocked to the Marines because they knew that the Pershing rules didn't apply to Marines. And with the Bellewood, that was a really big PR gaffe for Pershing and a big benefit to the Marine Corps. Before the Marines were brought into World War I, there was actually a threat from members of Congress of abolishing the United States Marine Corps, that the naval vessels, the detachment of Marines on naval vessels could have just been done with trained naval personnel, and what do you need Marines for? Because they didn't fit in. They weren't like the Army, land-based, they weren't sailors, and there were people who thought that the Marine Corps mission had pretty much expired. It was time for the Marine Corps to go away. The Battle of Bellewood and the PR benefit from that had pretty much guaranteed the existence of the Marine Corps, at least through modern day. But on June 6th, the 2nd Division, including the Marine Corps, went over the attack, launching an offensive that lasted until July 1st, 1918. That day, the Marine Brigade, 4th Marine Brigade, captured Hill 142 and Bourges. During the attack on Bellewood, Colonel Albertus W. Catlin, in command of the 6th Marine Regiment, was severely wounded and relieved by Lieutenant Colonel Harry Lee, and he remained in post until the regiment was demobilized in August 1919. Gunnery Sergeant Charles F. Hoffman was serving with the 49th Company of the 5th Marine Regiment near Chateau Thierry, and Lieutenant Junior Grade of the Dental Corps, Whedon E. Osborne, Navy, serving with the 6th Marine Regiment during the advance on Bourges were awarded the Medal of Honor, and Lieutenant Whedon's award was posthumous. June 10th, 1918, Major Edward B. Cole, in command of the 6th Machine Gun Battalion, was mortally wounded and relieved by Captain Harlan E. Major. The next day, Captain Major was relieved by Captain Osterhout, and so on and so forth. Lieutenant of the Medical Corps Orlando H. Perry, U.S. Navy Reserve, serving with the 5th Regiment of Marines in the Battle of Bellewood, was awarded the Medal of Honor June 11th. And then after severe fighting, the Marine Brigade completely cleared Bois de Belleau. The Battle of Bellewood was winding down as of June 26th, 1918. And so that 97th anniversary, 98th anniversary was yesterday. And then, of course, keep in mind, June 28th, that anniversary is tomorrow. So we're sitting here right in between on these major anniversaries. The Marine Corps, the Army, would still continue to fight it out until November 11th of 1918. There would still be another, 5 months left of fighting. And then we finally came into the last day. And we're going to roll some video here. It's video of the Battle of the Somme, even though it was not exactly at the very, very last. The last day of World War I, November 11th, 1918, is known to us today as Armistice Day, or as we would like to call it in the modern parlance, Veterans Day. But despite that being the last day of the war, many parts of the Western Front fighting did continue as normal. And what had happened, just a quick setup, was that after 3 intense days of negotiations in a rail siding just outside of Compiègne, the German delegation that had been brought to the personal carriage of Marshal Ferdinand Foch was ordered by its government in Berlin to sign any terms put on the table by the Allies. Potentially serious social upheaval had forced the government in Berlin into giving out this instruction, as the people there had already taken to the streets because of the chronic food shortages that were caused by the British naval blockade. Therefore, the German delegation had signed the terms of the armistice. But the armistice really was not official until later on, and there was still, even after the terms of surrender had been signed, there was still fighting going on. The Americans had taken casualties very, very heavy on the last day of the war, and this is because Pershing believed that the Germans had to be severely defeated in a military level in order to teach them a lesson. Pershing saw the terms as being soft on the Germans, and therefore he supported those commanders that wanted to be proactive in attacking German positions, even though he had known that the armistice had been signed. In particular, Americans had suffered heavy casualties attempting to cross the River Meuse on the night of the November 10th, morning of the 11th, with the Marines taking over 1,100 casualties alone. However, if they had waited until 11, they could have crossed the river unhindered with no casualties. The 89th U.S. Division was ordered to attack and take the town of Stenay on the morning of the 11th. It was the last town captured on the Western Front, but it came at a cost of 300 human lives. Let's roll some video. The last British soldier killed in World War I was Private George Edwin Ellison of the 5th Royal Irish Lancers. He was killed at Mons, where he had also fought in 1914, at 9:30 a.m., just 90 minutes before the ceasefire. The last French soldier to die was Augustin Trébuchon of the 415th Infantry Regiment. He was a runner, and in the process of taking a message to his colleagues at the front, informing them of the ceasefire, he was hit by a single shot and killed at 10:50, just 10 minutes before the armistice took effect. In total, 75 French soldiers were killed on November 11th, but their graves state it was November 10th. The last Canadian to die was Private George Lawrence Price of the Canadian Infantry, 2nd Canadian Division. He was killed at Mons, 10:58 a.m. He was the last Commonwealth soldier to be killed in World War I, just 2 minutes before the armistice took effect. The last American soldier killed was Private Henry Gunter, who was killed at 10:59 a.m. Officially, Gunter was the last man to die in World War I. His unit had been ordered to advance and take a German machine gun post. It is said that even the Germans, who knew that they were literally minutes away from a ceasefire, had tried to stop the Americans from attacking. But when it became obvious that this had failed, they fired on their attackers, and Gunter was killed. His divisional record stated that almost as he fell, the gunfire died away and an appalling silence prevailed. It is believed that the last German casualty of World War I was a junior German officer called Thomas, who approached some Americans to tell them that the war was over and that they could have the house that he and his men were just vacating. However, no one had told the Americans that the war was finished because of a communication breakdown, and Thomas was shot as he approached them after 11. And that was the cost of World War I. It was extremely heavy, even up until the very, very, very end. I had read some accounts about a year ago of World War I veterans who made that last charge, went to take the town, and they couldn't believe that the Germans knew that the war was over, and they did not. They felt deceived by their own command. But what happened now? We've got 100 years later. The landscape is still scarred. There's still poison, still trenches being dug up, a lot of munitions. We're going to take a quick look at a video that shows that. It's called the Zone Rouge. And what you're seeing are images throughout France. That first map that we had shown on this video was of what's called Zone Rouge, the red zone. And this is an area that nobody's been allowed to enter for nearly a century. Today, around 100 square kilometers, roughly the size of Paris, is still strictly prohibited by law from public entry. And agricultural use, because of an impossible amount of human remains and unexploded chemical munitions yet to be recovered from the battlefields, not just of World War I, but also of World War II. And, you know, this is the remains of war. We haven't seen that here except for the American Civil War. And there's still, as we've discussed previously, still efforts to protect battlefield land here. But the battlefield land in America wasn't scarred with chemical munitions. As a matter of fact, I do own a gas mask. I thought about bringing it today. But the problem I have is the gas mask was actually used in World War I. And there's still some mustard gas residue that's actually in that. And I opened it up once after I received it, and I did not even want to deal with how terribly debilitating that it was to our soldiers then. I didn't want any residue to debilitate me. I mean, I had smelled or inhaled just a tiny little whiff of mustard gas, and that was enough to, you know, make me feel a slight irritation. And this is 100-year-old stuff. And this stuff is still poisoning France. And right now, I'm not going to look back and say whether it was the right thing using mustard gas. Was it the right thing or wrong thing to do? Because, what happened in 1914 happened in 1914. But what happens now is the residual effect of those decisions that were made then. And so I think that one of the things that should happen is that the Zone Rouge should continue to be cleaned up. And I don't know what their efforts are in France. I've actually tried looking up some of that information, but I just did not have enough time from the time I actually learned about it last week to the airtime today. So one other ramifications, though, it's not always all bad here, of World War I was that it gave us some pretty good poetry. And one of the most acclaimed poets in World War I was Wilfred Owen. For some reason, the name Wilfred Brimley was coming to my mind, and I knew that wasn't right. But Wilfred Owen, and the first time I ever heard of him was when I was in a literature class at then Lakewood Community College. Today we know it a century. And the poem Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori was read, and it was about World War I, and it really, really captured me. So we're going to play an anthem for doomed youth, a quick little video with the Wilfred Owen poem. Put out by Reuters and AMC.
What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds.
And that was Wilfred Owen's poem. Unfortunately, the effects of World War I weren't quite over even after the war was done. And what you had after that was a lot of geopolitical stuff, which benefited the United States as a nation that received a lot of money from war debts between Belgium, Germany, and then, of course, munitions from France and Britain. But that also, the poor economic conditions in Germany gave rise to Adolf Hitler just 20 years later. And we know what happened in World War II. But anyhow, that's the end of our show for this week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week for July 4th.